Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Samantha here. Samantha, you're behind a really incredible, now it's a community, it's a major community of people that have come together to promote Latin American fashion. You host a summit, you're instrumental in putting this event together. It was recently in Miami, and it brings out some of the most talented people that are in fashion and part of the Latin American culture. And you've been really focused on fostering strong alliances to really promote Latin American fashion, and built a whole ecosystem around this. So the best and brightest can shine in that space. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your journey.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Ben. We're super happy with the outcome of this year's edition. So let's dig into what we do.
Awesome. So just kind of starting with your background, Samantha, specifically, how did your interest in the world of fashion, how did that kind of passion of yours of wanting to make this a career begin?
Well, actually, I didn't study fashion. I studied diplomacy. So I'm not a person that was interested in fashion since early age. I would be lying to you. It was just a matter of, life. I studied diplomacy. My goal was to be an ambassador and a diplomat for Mexico. I'm Mexican all over the world. So I did my studies in Europe. And as soon as I finished my studies, I needed to go back to Mexico to study for my foreign service exam and to get appointed to a mission or whatever. And that's when a good friend of mine told me that Saks was opening in Mexico City. Carlos Slim had just recently purchased the license, and he was going to open, the first luxury store in Mexico. Because I mean, they had been retail stores, obviously, like Palacio de Hierro and other retailers, but not as luxurious as Saks. Without knowing what a buyer does, I went into the offices and applied for whatever job they had because I needed a job in the meantime. And so the person that interviewed me was the buyer for shoes and handbags. So she was like, I only have one position available, which is assistant buyer for shoes and handbags. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it. And definitely, I didn't know what I was doing because, and I had never actually thought of what's the process of how merchandise gets into a store. Like, obviously, there is something involved in a process and whatever, but I had never ever thought of that. So I think I started in April 2007, and we were shooting to open the first store in November 2007. So it was very, very quick. It was a massive store. It was a very small team. And all of a sudden, I realized that what I had studied for in my career as a diplomat kind of like helped me in all these things and navigating through, being a buyer, like, the negotiation power and also trade agreements and understanding global economics and, letters of credit and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, cool. This is something that I could be doing for a living. I actually never finished I never completed my exam to be appointed in the foreign service. I stayed in fashion. I started growing really quick within the team. I was promoted very quickly into a junior buyer and then a senior buyer. And obviously, I mean, there's always a glamorous part about being a buyer and going and traveling to New York, Paris, Fashion Week, and, going to the showrooms and the shows. But the actual, work and day-to-day work of actually being a merchant is completely different. And that's something that I was very passionate about, except for all the Excel formulas, which I've always been super bad with math. And I was like, I can't believe I'm doing something that is actually entailing numbers like every single day of my life. But I developed this passion of really understanding how, the consumer behavior, because being being the only luxury retail store, we were very close to the consumers. As buyers, we had to go down. Our offices were on the top level of the building, and we had to go down at least once a day to talk to the consumers and really understand what they're looking for, so that we were informed for the next buy. Do they like the zipper on the pants on the front or on the side? What type of figure they're looking for, or what trends are they looking for, and that was really interesting because once we were again back in the in during market, we had this information, and sometimes we even purchased for that specific customer, and we had them on our phones, and we were like, hey, I'm in, the showroom for Alexander Wang, do you want this? Like, I can just place an order for you right now. So it's really a very close relationship with the consumer, and that's how I started.
Mhm. So, I mean, you were doing this for some time, and you got exposed to all different types of trends, and just really understood the landscape. What were you already starting to think about, like creating something like the Latin American Fashion Summit? Like, were you already thinking? Was it like the idea kind
Oh,
of in your
no, no,
mind?
no.
No.
By no means. But early on, I was exposed to all of this Latin American and Mexican designers that really wanted an opportunity to sell in a retail store. So since then, and that was one of the reasons why I decided to create Labs. It was because I understood the limitations of a lot of the designers that are actually looking for an opportunity. And I mean, I was, meeting with a lot of designers that would knock on my door and they would be like, hey, I want to sell here. And then I would see their line sheets and they were terrible, or they didn't have a strategy, a pricing strategy, or everything was perfect in the business model. But then when it came to quality or performance, or, you could tell that they were not going to deliver. And that is part of what in Latin America, I want to say that now is a completely different thing. But in Latin America, 10 to 15 years ago, you didn't study to be, when you study fashion, it was just studying to be a designer, not to be an entrepreneur, and understanding that fashion is a business. So a lot of these designers would come, knocking on everyone's doors, not just mine, asking for opportunities, but they were not equipped with the right skill sets to be, entrepreneurs at the same time. They were very creative, and they would love their creations, but they didn't know how to price the value of their time, or their, or their work, and their team's work, and all this like chain of events in order to make a business out of their creations. So I was a buyer for Saks for about 8 years. Then I got married. We were relocated to the States. I was a buyer there in Orlando. I actually lived in Orlando for 5 years. And I was a buyer for a company called Everything But Water, which is an Orlando based company. It was private, then it went public, and then it went private again. And it was an amazing experience, because I came from two doors. Saks opened two doors only in Mexico City. And when I got into Everything But Water, we were like 85 doors, and then by the time I went out, it was 150 doors. So they were like growing massively, and now I had to, buy for 150 doors, A, B, C, D stores, like, and it was a completely different thing. The sweet spot were $65 caftans, versus all these luxury things. So I want to say that that was kind of my school, and when it came to
Mhm.
retail, because of the amount of understanding this, again, consumer behavior in a much more in a different category, but in a much more aggressive way. And then after that, but still, a lot of brands kept contacting me like, hey, now that you're in Florida, I would love to sell in Florida. Which stores can I, approach? And I was like, I don't know. Like, it was a constant, like a constant of looking for opportunities. And then when I was relocated back to Mexico City, of course, I was like, okay, what I'm going to do? I only know how to be a buyer. And I applied for all these corporate jobs again, but then I didn't click again with this corporate system. I was already a mom. I was I was pregnant with my second one, so the corporate culture in Mexico is not that great when it comes to that, and I didn't fit into the corporate world. And my business partner, which she's also my sister-in-law, and we were in a vacation in Nicaragua, 2017, and we were just like talking about all these opportunities. She being a Latina based in New York, also like we met even before being sisters-in-law because of the fashion world, like we would see each other in fashion week, etc., etc. She came from more, she was a buyer as well, but then she came on like an editor in Vogue, and also she had lots of relationships in New York. She was like, hey, listen, all of these buyers are like definitely shifting their attention to Latin America because there was a very important factor in Latin American fashion, which was Joana Ortiz, a Colombian designer that definitely set a before and after in Latin American fashion. And everybody was like, ooh, what's happening in Latin America? We want to know more, but they didn't have access to the designers in Latin America. And at the same time, all of these designers in Latin America definitely didn't have access to all of these buyers internationally. So we both kind of share our point of view. I was living in Mexico, still having contact with all these designers that wanted opportunities. She was living in New York and saw an appetite for all of these buyers to look into the region. And we're like, okay, let's come up with a concept where everyone comes together once a year. And they learn from each other, they get to know each other. But the most important thing that we had to tackle was educating them with the right skills to be equipped to perform well once we introduce them to these, buyers. Because one thing is really, you know, getting to know the buyer at shop up, but then, okay, she might buy your collection, but the challenge there is to remain at shop up and to perform well there. So we definitely had to educate them. So we came up with this idea, which we had no idea whatsoever that this was going to take us into the business that it's right now. And we're like, yeah, we should do a summit. And we were sitting down in my mother-in-law's couch, and she's like, let me call a couple of friends and let's just test the waters. And all of them, they were like, yeah, sure, I'll be a speaker, because our relationships from our past jobs obviously gave us the opportunity to just like grab the phone and ask the former Vogue editor, like, would you be a speaker or a designer or, a CEO of a company? So we put together our first summit. It was in Riviera Maya in Mexico, because I was based in Mexico and it was easier to find like an exotic location where we will all come together. And 350 entrepreneurs from 18 countries of Latin America showed up. And they were like, we need to learn more. And it was like, wow. And we had 1,000 followers on Instagram at most. We were like, wow, the fact that you guys are here is just, it was a white space that we were like, this is something that we can be developing. So the second year we did it in Cartagena in Colombia, 2019. We had 650 people attending from all over Latin America. And it was just like massive. That year, obviously our lineup of speakers was amazing. We had Carolina Herrera, we had Carmen Busquets, we had Holly Rogers, Silvia Cherasi, of course, Joanna Ortiz, and all of these people that really donate their time to speak to these entrepreneurs in different topics, obviously retail, merchandising, technology, sustainability. We talk about everything, and then we do provide a lot of networking opportunities for them to meet. Of course, COVID happened, and we're like, okay, what do we do? Because we are supposed to be an in-person event, and now we can't. There's no way that we're gonna be in the same, like with 600 people in the same room. That was like completely not an option. So we had to pivot into digital, and as entrepreneurs, we had to like act really quickly and say, okay, what can we do? And obviously, our community didn't know how to, like, nobody knew what was going on and what was going to happen. But being an emerging brand in Latin America that was aspiring to get into retail store, and all of a sudden the retailers are like, yep, I have to close my shop. I'm gonna return your PO or whatever. They were like, what are we gonna do? And most of them didn't even have an e-commerce or social media. So throughout a different like series of webinars throughout the entire year of 2020, we started to navigate together with our community the different ways where they could still be in business. And we did do a virtual summit that year. And that was kind of like, I want to say, the silver lining for our company, because before, the Latin American Fashion Summit was perceived as a platform for Latinos only within the region. After the virtual summit, we started to penetrate into a demographic that we had no idea, and we had never activated there before. And a lot of US Hispanics started to come into our platform. They're like, hey, this is also useful for me. Like, it's not just for Latinos, for sure. And a lot of Latinos moved to the United States that year. So it was kind of like very interesting to see how a lot of US states, particularly Florida, California, Texas, New York, we had a really strong following there after the pandemic. So as soon as we were able to come back into the physical event, it was obvious for us that Miami had to be the place where we would do our first in-person event. And we stayed as a hybrid platform because obviously there were still a lot of people that couldn't travel. But we came back in 2023 because I remember that 2022 there was still like a wave of Delta or something happened, and we had to push our summit to March 2023. And Miami became kind of like the capital of the Latin American community in the States. And there was there's still a lot of money coming into to Miami and Florida and as a whole. And obviously the restrictions for COVID were non-existent back then. So it was very easy for us to do our first in-person summit there and kind of like drag our community of Latin Americans into their first gig in the US, as well as us for a fact, because we're still a very emerging business. I mean, we've been in business for 7 years, so it's still very new. And for us to do our first summit in the United States was a huge responsibility. We were like carrying all of our community with us into the States. Um, but it was great. And that's when kind of like the company took the next level into partnerships, into a broader demographic of a community. And that's when we kind of like boomed into different lines of business. We were not only a summit anymore. And as an entrepreneur, you never know what your idea is going to take you to. We thought like this was going to be a once a year event. And then our community started to ask from us a lot of things like, of course, the pandemic, forced us to be, into digital, but then we created an app for them, for our online community that to be connected 24/7. So we have, that line of business. Then all of the brands that we partnered with, they're like, okay, this is fantastic. I want to activate with you during your summit, but what else can we do all year? Okay, let's start creating small format events for you and introducing you to our Latino community, which by the way is like an amazing consumer, for all of these luxury brands. And then little by little, we started to develop other lines of business into our model that kept us, obviously the summit is something that we work all year long for, but still these events would be, something that a recurring revenue stream for us that we had no idea that or planned that could happen to us. Fast forward to 2024, the one that we just recently closed in November. From the 8th to the no, I'm sorry, from the 9th to the 11th. We were super happy with the results. I mean, the Miami Design District is one of our biggest champions and, the host and biggest sponsor of our mission. We had Caring as a company believing in us for the first time ever, and LVMH brands were there. And so as a very small, concept and Latin American, I would say, entrepreneurship, like two Latina founders, we were like, wow, this thing is, not flourishing yet, but still the seeds that we have been planting for 7 years are kind of like, growing a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's amazing what you've accomplished in such a short time. I mean, Samantha, just kind of looking back at this like in-person event you just did in Miami, like what do you think you really excelled at and you guys did great at overall? And like what do you think you want to change going forward or like stuff you want to add?
So this time around, we did something different. To answer your question, when we went back to the physical event, we've always done it in the Miami Design District for several reasons. One, we discovered that our demographic is a very affluent Latina. She's an entrepreneur, but she's very affluent. She might still live in Colombia, Mexico, Venezuela, or she just moved to the States. But it's a demographic that is also very interesting to the luxury brands that are in the district, and it also resonates with them when they walk into a place where all of luxury and an entire neighborhood full of art and amazing restaurants and whatnot. But what we did different this year from other years, we used to build a huge tent where everything was contained under that tent. And for the first time ever, what we did was to create a circuit. It was a multi-venue concept. A lot of our community, we do a lot of focus groups and we do a lot of like monkey surveys, and our community really wanted to feel things more intimate. And I think that this comes across in every single level as a consumer behavior. People really want to establish connections, and inside of a tent for 500 people, you do not feel like very intimate and connected to the speaker that's on stage. So what we try to do this time around, which we had tested in other formats, was intimate talks. And I mean, as intimate as, 150 chairs, 200 chairs, but it definitely changed to different ambiance when it came to, people were much more engaged. They were, willing to raise their hand and ask a question without feeling, like, oh my God, I'm going to sound crazy or stupid if I do. Um, so that was very interesting to see how we changed kind of like the concept of the entire conference. And also another thing was just to create a circuit around the neighborhood and really bringing more impressions or bringing more visibility to the rest of the things that were surrounding us instead of containing our entire audience under one roof. We had a lot of in-store activations from participating companies like Balenciaga activated Bottega, Kern Sabed just opened and activated. But like we had like 6 in-store activations, multiple lunches. So people really felt that the agenda was definitely jammed with a lot of things, but they could pick and choose which activation or which talk they would go to between 3 different venues and a lot of other outside activities. So I think that changing things and evolving. I was recently talking to someone this morning and I was just like, I mean, a community is basically a word for consumer, right? If you're providing a service, if you're providing a product, your community is basically your client. And once that client, you have served their purpose, they're gone. Like how do you retain that client? And it is by evolving. It is by offering something new. It is by, meeting another demand that they might have. So for us, it has been like that. We have seen a different shift of, people that could actually, like this time around, I was surprised people from Georgia, from the Carolinas, from Florida, everyone from all parts of Florida were driving down to Miami to know about us. And I was like, okay, this is a new customer, but also what about our entire community? Like, how do we evolve for them? And how do we provide more information and more connections and make it new? So this time around, we were very, very surprised with the outcome and we were very happy with everything that we have done. And I think that the platform has a lot to offer and coming in the next, I don't know, 5 years to really evolve into something else, and still be in touch with our community and help them navigate, in this saturated industry.
Mm. If you were to like lay out like a couple goals that you like really are focusing on now, like what would those be? This is just the last question I have.
Well, I think that for us, definitely an eye opener was Latin American countries in the South. Like, really, we had for the first time ever Argentinian brands. We have never even visited Argentina as a company. The way we activate and the way we start to accrue a consumer or a communities by traveling to all of these Latin American countries, activating there, getting to know them, and that's how we like acquire that customer. And we have, I mean, because Argentina is extremely far away from us, we have never been there. And this time around, we saw a lot of Chilean brands, Argentinian brands, Brazilian brands. So definitely an eye opener and a strategy for us is to acquire more South American countries in that sense, because they're so far away that kind of like nobody like turns their head to the South that much, and they really want, the proximity to the States or to Europe in that sense. So definitely that's one. We have been seeing a lot of growth in Latinos in Europe. And that is something like, for example, in Madrid and in Spain overall. So definitely that's an opportunity to, now that we have established this connection with the US, maybe the next thing could be also establishing connections and business for Latin brands in Europe. And again, I think that, in hindsight, just looking at our model and seeing what definitely works, what definitely doesn't work, and just focusing on what's, worth it and not be, I think that there's a lot of noise out there on how you need to carry your business. And again, being an entrepreneur, a new entrepreneur, and I've never been an entrepreneur in my life. This is the first time ever. I came from the corporate world, like I said. So you're learning all the time. We just, started to raising money after 7 years of being self-funded. This is the first time that we were like, okay, if we want to scale this company, we need to raise money. And so this is a completely different thing for me. So another thing to learn, and just aspire to, keep raising money and scaling this platform and providing more opportunities for Latin American brands in different markets.
Mhm. Well, I love what you've already done, Samantha. I think it's really been important for the Latin American fashion community. I mean, you highlight a lot of what's interesting and innovative there that hasn't fully come to the surface in other areas, and you've given people a platform and a voice, which is important. And I think by bringing this to the US, it's just going to continue to have that impact. So I'm excited to see what happens next with your raise and other things. And I wish you much success on the next events. Thanks for coming on.